Okay, this is Lab A, Part 3. In Part 2, we did the pre-configuration wizard to set some basic configurations on the ASA 5505 device. And we reloaded the ASA, and you can see from the output here that ASA-init, the host name that we set in the pre-configuration wizard, is still there. So it looks like it took. So we can type enable and get to privileged user mode, put in our password Cisco, and we're in privileged user mode, and we're ready now to manually configure the ASA device using the command line interface. So the first thing that we're going to do now that we're in there is we're going to go to global config mode by putting in the conft command. And when we do that, we're given a notice, and the notice says, do we want to enable anonymous reporting and send reports to Cisco? And you can hit yes or no. For right now, I'm going to put no and hit enter, and we're going to move on. So now we're in global config mode, and we can manually begin configuring the ASA device. So we could change the host name. For instance, we could say hostname CCNAS-ASA. We can set the domain name, domain-name, say CCNA security.com. We can manually set the enable password. Now we did this with the pre-configuration wizard, but it's always good to know the commands for doing it. So enable password. Notice we do not have to use the enable secret command to encrypt the password. All we have to do is say enable password, and then this time we'll say class, following along with the lab. Now that we've done that, we can also, if we want, manually set the clock. We also set the clock during the pre-configuration wizard. But if we want to, we could say clock set and then pass the hours. So we could say 2200 hours, let's say 23 minutes, 0 seconds, May 12th, 2012. And now the clock is set. All right. So now that we've done that, it's time to start configuring the interfaces. And we're going to start by configuring two of the interfaces. Now, the ASA 5505 allows us to configure an inside interface, an outside interface, and a DMZ interface. We're going to start with the inside and the outside interfaces. So since we're going to do that, we've got 3 Ethernet cables going to our ASA device in the topology. The outside on Ethernet 0, the inside on Ethernet 1, and the DMZ on Ethernet 2. Since we're going to do the DMZ later in the lab, I'm going to remove the Ethernet cable from the device. And I'll talk about why I'm doing that later. So now we have the outside and the inside that we need to configure. Now, the ASA 5505, these switch ports really are layer 2 switch ports. So to give them an IP address, we have to do it indirectly by assigning the IP address to the switched virtual interface or VLAN interface. Now to do that, set that down. What we're going to do is we're going to say interface VLAN 1 and go into interface configuration mode for the VLAN. And now what we can do is we need to give it a name. So we'll say name, and if you remember, we already set one up in the pre-configuration wizard as the management VLAN. Now we're going to change VLAN 1 to the inside interface. So we'll say name interface, and we'll say inside. So we give it the inside name, and now we can pass it the IP address. With the subnet mask. All right, and the IP address has been taken, so that's good. Now what we need to do is change the security level. When we set up the management interface for interface VLAN 1, it gave a security level of 0. We need to change that. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the security level to 100. The interfaces on the 5505 need to have a security level. And the reason is, by default, in routed mode, the ASA 5505 considers a security level of 100 as a trusted interface. And so it will allow traffic to go from a greater number, like 100 trusted, to 0 untrusted. So it'll allow traffic to flow from a trusted side of the network to an untrusted side, but it will by default deny all traffic from a 0 to a 100 or from an untrusted network to the trusted side. So we set it to 100, and then we can type no shut. And now interface VLAN 1 is done being configured. So let's move on to VLAN 2. So we'll say interface VLAN 2, and this is going to be for our outside interface. So we'll say name interface outside. And you can see as soon as we put in that command, it says the security level for the outside interface needs to be set to 0 by default, or it is set to 0 by default. Now that's fine, but let's manually configure that as well after we set up our IP address. For the IP address, we'll say IP address 209, let's see here, 209.165.200.226, and that's following the diagram on the topology. This is the 209.165.200.224 network. So 226 is the next available address, and that's what we're going to use for the interface. And then we have to give it the subnet mask. All right, and that looks correct. It's /29. Perfect. We'll set the security level manually to 0, since this is the untrusted side of the network, and then a no shut command. All right. Now, if you want to look at your configuration, one thing that's really nice about the ASA CLI is you can run a show run command from any interface configuration mode. So if I do a show run, I can see my interface VLAN 1 configuration and my interface VLAN 2 configuration, and then hit Q to jump out, and I'm still in interface configuration mode. So we applied IP addresses to the VLANs, but not to the physical switch ports. So now what we need to do is we need to do that. So to associate those IP addresses with the VLANs to the switch ports. So we'll say interface Ethernet 0 / let's say 0, and that's this port right here, Ethernet 0, and that's going to the outside. So we'll say switch port access VLAN 2. No shut. All right, so now the Ethernet 0 has been set for VLAN 2, which is the untrusted side, the WAN side, and now interface 01, switch port access VLAN 1, and also the no shut command. If we do a show run, you can look at the configuration and you'll see that switch port access VLAN 2 shows up under interface Ethernet 0/0, but ports 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 don't show anything. That's because by default, all of the switch ports are already in VLAN 1. That's the default VLAN. And to prove the point, let's hit Q here. We can do a show, and it's not show VLAN. In this case, it's show switch VLAN. And if we do that, you can see that ports 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are all part of VLAN 1, which is now named the inside VLAN. All right. Now the lab also points out that you can run a few other commands that are helpful to know. So show interface IP brief, and that's like show interface VLAN brief or show interface brief. You can see here the Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1 is up and up, and you can see the other interfaces are set to down. And you can also see VLAN 1, VLAN 2, the IP address and status up, protocol up, as well as the loopback virtual 0 interface with the loopback address also set to up and up. Okay, so now we should be able to, if these interfaces are configured correctly, we should be able to ping our host. Now, I took my laptop and I changed my laptop from PCA to PCB on the topology. So now I'm connected to switch 2 and I have a 192.168.1.3 address on this laptop. So let's see if we can ping that host. 192.168.1.3, and you can see that the router is able to ping, not the router, I'm sorry, the ASA device is able to ping my laptop over the Ethernet. And if we open up a command prompt, I should be able to do the same as well. All right, perfect. Okay, now I can ping the device, but the question is, can I telnet to it? So let's try that. Telnet 192.168.1.1, and you can see that it's trying to connect and telnet, but it's not working. So what I'll do is a Control C here, quit or an escape. All right, and what I'll do is we can configure the ASA device to accept that telnet. So what we'll do is I'll say Q and go back to global config mode and put in the command telnet, the network that's allowed to telnet to the ASA device. And we'll say the 192.168.1.0 network. Give it the subnet mask. Inside interface. So telnet from the one network is allowed to the inside interface, and we'll hit enter, and we'll say telnet, we'll set a timeout of 10 minutes. All right, and you can say telnet timeout and put a question mark, and you can see it says set the minutes. The default is 5 minutes. So timeout 10 minutes. So now that we have done that, we should be able to telnet in. Let's see if it'll work. Say up arrow telnet, and you can see that we're met with the prompt. You can type in and we're in CCNA security-ASA, and let's see if we can do enable password class, and we're in. So that's nice. So now we have telnet access to the device. Now telnet is not the preferred way of accessing the device. SSH is, because it's encrypted, but for right now this is good for the lab. Now how about connecting with our graphical user interface, or our ASDM, our Adaptive Security Device Manager? To do that, what we can do is we can put these commands in from right here, right, using the terminal, or from my command prompt now, since I'm already inside the Adaptive Security Appliance. So let's see if we can do it from here. Conf T. Now I'm in global config mode, and we'll say HTTP server enable. All right, so that enables the web server on the ASA, and what else here? Also, what hosts will have access. So just like we did with telnet, we have to let it know who has access. HTTP, and the command is 192.168.the1 network, we'll say. Anybody on the one network has access. We could set it for a host as well, like one host only. We could say, for instance, only host 1.3 has access. But in this case, we'll let the whole network. All right, that looks good. 255.255.255.0 inside. the inside interface. Okay, so we've enabled the web server and we've allowed the one network to connect to it. So let's give it a try. So we'll open up a browser and we'll see if we can connect to it. Now you're going to need to connect to it from HTTPS secure, and we'll put in the IP address. So HTTPS://192.168.1.1 and hit enter. And you can see that we have to OK the connection and add an exception. And there it is, Cisco ASDM 6.4. And what we can do is we can, from this interface right here, we can run the ASDM and install the Java applet on our system that will connect to the ASDM, or we can just run it. So let's see here, which one do we want to do? Let's just run ASDM. So we'll click Run ASDM, click OK. And we'll trust the content. And there it is. So now, Cisco ASDM-IDM launcher, we don't need to put in the username because we haven't set up individual users and passwords on the device yet. We just have a global admin user. So what we can do is skip the username and just put in the password, the enable password class, and click OK. And you can see it's launching the software, and we're going to soon have the graphical management tool, the Cisco ASDM. All right, and there it is. So it's still loading. All right, here's Cisco ASDM, and you can see this is a nice management tool for configuring the ASA device. You can see it's got a dashboard. It shows us some statistics about traffic, interface status. You can see our interfaces are up here, inside, outside, the IP addresses, the line, the link, up and up. And if we go to configuration, all kinds of configuration and management tools available to us. Configure the firewall, VPN, device management, all kinds of stuff. All right, so that ends part 3 of Lab A.